Okay, what we're going to be talking about right now is we're going to be talking about forestry, grasslands, and how we can use them smarter. So let's start out with wolves in Yellowstone. Great question on the AP exam. I wrote it. Basically, what happened is between 1850 and 1900, 2 million wolves were destroyed. Why? Because Little Red Riding Hood was killed by a wolf, and therefore I want to see more Bambis, and so we had to get rid of the wolves because they're killing all the Bambis. And then we discovered, hey, that's kind of silly because without the wolves, there's damage being done to Yellowstone National Park and elsewhere because, now the elk can go anywhere. They don't have to stay away from the streams. They can go down to the streams, spend all their time by the streams, eating all the aspen trees. And so the number of aspen trees by the streams died off. Therefore, a lot of critters, like the beaver, went away because that's one of the woods that they use on their dams. When they reintroduced the wolves back into Yellowstone, the streams, instead of going straight, started meandering more, like they're supposed to. There started to be beaver dams develop. All because the elk were forced to spend less time down by the riparian area, by the watershed, and more time up in the hills so that they did not become dinner. So what are some of our impacts on biodiversity? Now watch right here. This is put together by our textbook. This thing right here, even if you do not read the textbook, look at the pictures. The pictures in our textbook are very, very good. They supply tons and tons of information. This one is basically saying, as our population increases, we increase the amount of agriculture. We increase the amount of industry, the polluting industry. Our economic production and consumption leads to more agriculture, more industry, but we also need to undergo recreation. The effects on the environment are destruction. If we have to have more and more area for urban areas, there go the areas for the coyotes, the bunny rabbits, and stuff like that. Therefore, that's why Monday morning? On my way to work, 100 feet away from my front door was a coyote sitting in the middle of the road. A little bit freaky. Also, the things that happen is we basically get changes in the chemical cycles because, we're driving all the way to Palmdale and back here during the day so that we can get to work. We have people that live in Redlands. They have to leave their home at 4:45 in the morning to get here. Is that interfering with the cycles? Oh yeah, because now there's more nitrogen in the air, more other things in the CO2 in the atmosphere. There's changing in the species. Because of all these roads, a lot of the mountain lions cannot get over to see their friends. Because it's kind of hard for them to get across the freeway successfully. And we pollute that water, air, and soil. What are the effects of that? We lose all the biodiversity and we increase climate change, which does affect. So who cares? Who cares if we get rid of all the biodiversity? Well, I want my kids and grandkids to be able to see all these things. And we'll go into some other reasons why. So how do we manage our forests? Some of the things that the forest does for us is it makes sure that the CO2 goes out of the atmosphere. It makes sure that the water goes down into the aquifers. Okay, basically, because if you've got a forest, the water's going to come down and it's going to hit fairly softly and it's going to flow, but it's not going to go very fast. If instead you have, La Cañada's parking lot, we're not going to have a lot of water filtering down into the groundwater because of La Cañada's parking lot or all the roads. Forests are going to reduce the soil erosion because the water's not going to hit so hard. It's going to be all the trees and everything. It's going to absorb, purify the water and the air. like the CO2 out of it, it's going to influence the climate. If you look at the rainforest is the rainforest because of the rainforest. I know that doesn't make a lot of sense to begin with, but if you look at it, rain comes over the Andes. The amount that comes over it is limited. It rains, and when it rains, the water goes down into all those trees. And those trees undergo transpiration. When they go under transpiration, water goes up out of the trees back into the sky. And then 10 miles later, it's raining back down. And that continues all across the Amazon. Most of the water that comes down as rain comes from the trees themselves. And now that we're cutting down the rainforest, we're actually getting times when there is a dry season, a drought. Never happened in hundreds and hundreds of years, up until recently. Droughts are actually happening in the Amazon forest because we don't have as many trees. It's going to store the CO2. Why? Because when you cut down the tree, it's going to decompose. Decompose is going to produce CO2 and methane. When it's there, it's going to pull out the CO2. And it's going to be a storage area for the CO2. What are some of the economic services? See the difference between ecological and economic services? Economic services, it provides fuel wood. Most of the people, a huge amount of people in the developing countries do not have gas stoves. They don't have electricity. How do they cook? How do they warm their homes? By cutting down trees. We in the developing countries use lumber. We use the trees for paper. We use the forest also for mining various things. But we also go there to play. I really like going to Yosemite, Sequoia, especially when that bear rubbed up against our tent. That was so exciting. So there are different types of forests. One type is called the old growth. There are very few old growth left. One of them that I'm going to be seeing over Thanksgiving break is up in Seattle. West of Seattle is an old growth forest, a temperate rainforest, where it's been there for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. Because of that, it's got so much diversity. Okay, within not just the plants, but all the organisms there. It has so many specialized niches that aren't found in any other type of forest, like the secondary forest and tree farms. The next type of thing that happens is second growth, where you go in and you clear cut. One of the ways that you cut down trees is you go in and you level it. That's called clear cut. It's very disturbing. Like I said, I was up in Washington State one time, driving along, and driving on the road west of Seattle is unbelievable. You're in your small car on this road, and the trees are 100 feet tall, solid on both sides. And all of a sudden, I went around a corner, and there was a clear cut. And it was just devastating to see, because where are all the trees? There's nothing there. With clear cut, all that's there are the stumps. But with tree farms, secondary growth is you clear it out, or cutting, you clear it out, and then you come back and you plant trees. You let them grow, and 20, 30 years later, you come back and you harvest it again. Now, is there the diversity of trees there were in the old forest? No. But we can use that idea to get rid of having to harvest the old forests. Because if we do tree farming, there is enough farming areas to grow the trees for all of our paper needs, all of our lumber needs. We do not need to destroy the old growth forests. Any questions? And again, there it's showing that after 30 years, you come back and cut it. And then after 5 years, you go back and... Now, if you replant those, are you going to plant trees that are shade-loving or ones that like sunlight? sunlight because there's no shade. And it's going to be a secondary succession, not primary. Why? Because the soil is still there. It's not until probably age 20 to 25 that you start getting shade-loving plants in there. Because now you've got a canopy. So if we look at the degradation due to deforestation, one, because of water rushing off, because there's nothing to stop it, you have tons and tons of soil erosion. That soil erosion gets into the aquatic system, and it kills a lot of the trout because they have to have fairly pure, high oxygenated water. And when you've got cloudiness in there, the plants cannot grow in there because of all the dust in there, and therefore it's not as much. And so you get carp as opposed to trout. You get some critters extinct because they can't handle it. Some of the native species have to go away because their tree that they always grow up in is no longer there. Any questions on that? The problem is, like I said, half the people in the developing world have to use trees. But they can plant them. They can create tree plantations, tree farms themselves so that they can use that. We'll talk about that in a second. When you're harvesting a tree in, say, the Amazon, you can't go out and do it easily. You have to build roads. Why? Because you have to have the lumber trucks. You have to have the lumber trucks so that you can haul it away and market it. And so you have to have the first road. When you have that first road, it makes it easier for other roads to be put in to cause degradation, fragmentation, habitat fragmentation, so that the critters can't see their cousins anymore because it's too far away. Now, different ways that we cut trees. One of the ways is selective cutting. In these, what typically happens, and there was a law written about this back around 2000, where lumber companies were allowed to go in, and they were allowed to cut a certain number of the trees, and it had to be equally spaced. When they did that, it left some of them behind so that the area could be repopulated with the trees. However, because it was very, very thin, a lot of the shade-loving plants died off. And so it was not like the old growth forest. Another way that you can grow it is clear cutting. As you can cut it is clear cutting, where nothing is left. Problem with that, if it's on a slope, what happens to all that soil? It's gone. Okay? And nothing survives this. This goes back to a secondary succession. What the best way of doing it is called strip cutting. What they do is they have this area right here where they cut, and say 3 to 10 years later, okay, they come into a new area and cut. By that time, the first area you cut is starting to look like that. The new area is like this. And what happened is 5 to 10 years before that, they cut this area down here. The advantage of this is if this is left uncut, doesn't it supply the seeds? Doesn't it decrease the amount of erosion in the area? And therefore the old area can come back. Whereas if you clear cut, there are not going to be any seeds to repopulate the area. You have to do it as an organization. That does not leave any seeds behind. This does. And it allows it to repopulate the way it should be. So when you harvest trees, the advantage, if you clear cut, what's the advantage? You just go in and you cut everything. You use huge machines. Remember that huge machine in the video where it came in, grabbed hold of the tree, and it cut it off? It can do that if you're clear cutting. You get lots of lumber very fast, huge profits, but if you then go in with a tree plantation, you can repopulate that area with fast-growing trees. Okay, but it doesn't go back to where it was. Does not require a lot of imagination, not a lot of intelligence to cut down all the trees. You just tell someone, go cut trees, and they do. Okay. Some of the disadvantages, there's no trees. Biodiversity is gone. The wildlife is gone. Huge openings, completely different ecosystem than what it was. So what do? We had to go into an area and make sure we do not destroy an area that is very, very fragile. We had to grow timber in longer areas. We had to go to tree plantations. We cannot clear cut on huge slopes because then we've got so much erosion that it destroys all the areas around it. Are there any questions on this? But what about fires? Do fires have a place in forests? The answer is yes. What we see on the left is what's called a ground fire. What we see on the right is a crown fire. With the ground fire, that should happen every 7 to 10 years. The reason why is because we found out about it is Smokey the Bear and Sequoia National Park. Smokey the Bear came around, you'll find out about it tomorrow, and basically because of Smokey the Bear, every time there was a fire, we put it out. And everyone was so excited because now we were getting all this stuff growing on the ground. The problem was in Sequoia National Park, there were no baby sequoia trees. There are also no other type of pine trees that cannot fertilize themselves without fire. Why? Because it's the fire that comes in and it opens up the pine cone, allowing the pollen to go in and fertilize the seeds so it can regenerate that tree. And so as soon as after they discovered this, they had a controlled fire in the sequoia area, and almost immediately there were new baby sequoias. People were beyond fire. They're happy. Now, the other reason why you want these type of fires is when you have this type of fire, it gets rid of a lot of the dead stuff that's there, all the flammable stuff. If you don't allow it, instead of being like this, you got flammable stuff from here. So it's like when you do it every 5 to 10 years, it's like taking a piece of paper and putting it in the fireplace and lighting it on fire. It'll be fairly, not very hot. But if you put about 20 pieces of fire in there, it's going to be extremely hot. And therefore, the flames are going to reach up to the top. The other thing that's interesting is when you have a fire like this, these trees oftentimes have bark that are fire resistant. If you go touch the sequoia bark, it gives a lot. It's very flame resistant. It will not burn unless you get it so hot like this that there's no chance for it not burning. People, however, don't like seeing fires because of Smokey the Bear. If you do it correctly, you don't have to go out with a rake. You can actually burn all the stuff that's underneath the trees, get rid of it so we do not have a massive fire like what happened in Northern California last year. Second thing that we need to make sure you do, if you have property close to a forested area, make sure you have an area around your property that is clear of trees. Not build up with a lot of plant life, because if it is, it's going to be flammable. And since your house is flammable, it may go. You don't want to do that. And so what we need to do, logging, it meets the timber needs of the United States. We can grow the forest back, especially if you have tree farms. Keeps lumber prices down. However, what it does, it doesn't supply a lot of our lumber needs. We can get most of our lumber needs by tree farms. We do not need to cut down the national forest. About the first time I went to Yellowstone National Park with Yosemite National Park with the Yosemite Institute, we went down to the Grove. And right close to the Grove is the edge of the national park. Next to it is a national forest. And we took the quarter to half mile walk over there, down to Merced Grove. And when we got over there, we got to the edge of the national park, and it was disgusting. Because we had all these beautiful trees, and when we got to the national forest, there were no trees. Because cutting down trees, you can buy permission to cut down trees. You can buy permission to go mining in national forest. You can't in national park. In fact, in national parks, if you pick up a rock, you can go to jail. You cannot take anything out of a national park. What we can do is we can grow bamboo. We can grow something called kanaf, I believe that's how you pronounce it, which will work exactly like regular lumber. You put it into plywood, it does exactly the same thing, and it grows so fast it's not funny. This is what deforestation in the tropics looked like. Originally, complete forest, but in 1974, there was a road put down. Went like that. In 75, it went over like that. 25 years later, that road is still right here, but look at what happened to the forest. Now that that main road is there, it's so easy to go sideways. Oh, because we need cattle for the United States to sell to the United States. We need corn for the United States. Tropical deforestation is disgusting. They're losing 1 to 2 acres of tropical rainforest a day, if not more often than that. And more than half of all the plants on the planet are in the rainforest. Huge amount of the oxygen that is produced is in the rainforest. But even more important, equally important, there are drugs that come out of those, pharmaceuticals that help us. For example, this one helps blood pressure. This one right here is for heart attacks. This one right here, this one was discovered 1 year after my mom died of ovarian cancer. Pacific yew plant from the Pacific temperate rainforest was discovered to cure ovarian cancer the year after my mom died. The first one that's really known was by native indigenous tribes in the United States. They used the willow bark from the willow tree for headaches. That's where we got our aspirin. This one is for malaria. This is for leukemia, Hodgkin's disease. This one is for insecticides. There are so many drugs that come from the tropical rainforest, and so many that we don't have yet because we haven't found them yet. That may not be there if we destroy it. And so what's here, what can we do? Deforestation causes the things we can do. The top one is some of the reasons why we want to do deforestation. We want oil drilling, mining, flooding from dams. For example, Three Gorges Dam in China, 4 million people were displaced. Panda bear is gone from a lot of panda bears are no longer in their area because the forests were covered with water. Tree plantations, farmers. The problem is we need to make sure that we don't do that because we want to keep the trees alive. What can we do? We want to keep diverse and endangered areas alive, educate settlers, make sure that this doesn't happen. So one thing you can do is there are places where you can contribute money to replant trees. Or our Green Club or other clubs could actually go up into Angeles Crest. Adopt Angeles Crest. Certain areas, go in and plant trees. Or even on campus, plant trees. This lady right here, in an undeveloped country, organized poor women to go out and plant trees. Why? Because they needed the trees to feed their families and to keep them warm. And so by replanting the trees, they had enough for fuel wood. If she can do it, so can you. So we need to also maintain our grasslands. I'm not going to go into a great deal here, because where does the buffalo go? Where are the prairie dogs going to go? Where are the pronghorn antelopes? If we destroy this, they're not going to have any place to go. So why do we want to do this? How do we restore an area? We have to identify the cause, stop what's causing the abuse, reintroduce by replanting the trees, reintroducing the wolf, protect it, and then come up with schemes to make sure that it works. What can we do? We need to help the hot spots. A hotspot is an area where there are endangered species. There's a whole bunch of them around the world, including California, where there are areas where there's tons of endangered species. Identify one of those and make sure they don't lose any more trees. Keep old growth that are still alive there, because once it's gone, it's gone. Look for places in the ocean that are hot spots where critters are dying off. Remember that thing about the sea otter? Where basically they're dying off now because of all the whaling that's going on. And therefore the killer whales are going after the otters because there's not enough whales for them. So there's secondary things we need to look at. Are there any questions? I'm going to leave you with this. Some of the things you can do to help a forest.